It was 3:14 a.m. when Arthur unlocked his front door, the scent of another woman's cheap vanilla perfume still clinging to the collar of his bespoke suit. He thought he was the master of his own universe, a man who could juggle a devoted wife, a high-stakes career, and a secret lover without ever dropping the ball. He was wrong. 10 minutes later, he would be standing in his master bedroom, paralyzed not by a scream or a gunshot, but by a pair of Cartier diamond earrings and a piece of cream-colored stationery that would dismantle his life, word by terrifying word. This is the story of how Arthur Pendleton lost everything the moment he thought he had it all. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made them slick. Arthur Pendleton steered his silver Mercedes S-Class through the winding roads of Medina, the tires hissing against the wet asphalt. The digital clock on the dashboard read 3:05 a.m. He felt a familiar, adrenaline-laced exhaustion. It was the specific kind of fatigue that came from living a double life. He had just spent 4 hours in a loft apartment in Capitol Hill with Chloe, a 24-year-old graphic designer who laughed too loud and thought Arthur's stories about architectural zoning laws were fascinating. Chloe was chaos and color. She was the antithesis of his home life. His home life was Evelyn. Arthur loosened his tie, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. He rubbed his jaw, checking for lipstick, checking for glitter, checking for guilt. He found none. He had been doing this for 6 months, and the guilt had evaporated around month 2, replaced by a smug sense of entitlement. He provided for Evelyn, didn't he? He paid the mortgage on the sprawling lakefront estate. He paid for her classic car restoration hobby. He showed up to the galas. He was a good husband, he told himself, who just needed a release. He pulled into the long, gravel driveway. The house loomed ahead, a modern architectural marvel of glass and steel that he had designed himself. It was dark, save for the landscape lighting that cast long, dramatic shadows against the cedar siding. Arthur killed the engine. The silence of the suburbs was heavy. Usually, this was the moment the anxiety pricked at him. The fear that Evelyn might be awake, waiting in the kitchen with a glass of wine and a question in her eyes. But Evelyn was a heavy sleeper. She took melatonin at 10:00 p.m. religiously. By now she would be deep in REM sleep, curled on her left side, the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets pulled to her chin. He exited the car, careful not to let the door slam. He walked to the front door, the damp air cooling the heat on his skin. He punched in the code, 10:14, their anniversary, and the lock clicked open with a mechanical surrender. The foyer was cold. That was the first thing he noticed. Not just the ambient temperature, but a stillness that felt distinct, almost pressurized. The house usually smelled of fresh lilies and the faint, warm hum of the radiant floor heating. Tonight, it smelled of nothing. It smelled like a vacuum. Arthur removed his shoes, placing them silently on the mat. He crept up the floating staircase, his socks sliding against the polished walnut. He reached the landing and looked toward the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, holding his breath, preparing to slip into the bathroom, shower off the scent of Chloe's vanilla body spray, and slide into bed beside his wife. "Evelyn?" he whispered, just in case. No answer. He walked to the bed. It was made. Arthur blinked. He reached out and touched the duvet. It was tight, crisp, and completely undisturbed. He frowned, checking his watch again. 3:18 a.m. Maybe she fell asleep in the guest room. Maybe she was sick. He turned toward the ensuite bathroom. "Ev?" The bathroom was dark. He flicked the light switch. The sudden brightness stung his eyes. The marble countertops gleamed. The tub was dry, Panic began to coil in his stomach, a cold, slippery snake. He walked back into the bedroom and turned on the bedside lamp. That was when he saw it. On the dark wood of the antique vanity table Evelyn loved so much, there was a small velvet box. Beside it, a single sheet of paper folded once. Arthur walked over, his legs feeling suddenly heavy, like he was wading through water. He recognized the velvet box. It was the gift he had given her for their 10th anniversary, just 3 weeks ago. A pair of pear-cut diamond earrings, worth more than Chloe's entire student loan debt. He opened the box. The diamonds sat there, glittering aggressively under the lamplight. They looked like accusations. He looked at the paper. It was Evelyn's personal stationery, heavy stock with her monogram embossed at the top. He picked it up. His hands, usually so steady when drawing blueprints, were trembling. He read the first line. "Arthur, I know about the apartment in Capitol Hill." Arthur froze. The world didn't stop. It just narrowed down to the point of a needle. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the wind outside, the beating of his own heart. It all vanished. "I know about Chloe," the letter continued. "I know you were with her on my birthday, when you said you were in Chicago. And I know you're with her tonight." Arthur sat down on the vanity stool. The wood creaked. He felt like he had been punched in the throat. Arthur read the letter again, his eyes scanning the elegant, cursive loops of Evelyn's handwriting. It was terrified handwriting. No, it was angry. No, it was precise. It was the handwriting of a woman who had drafted this text days, maybe weeks, in advance. "You always thought I was passive, Arthur. You mistook my contentment for ignorance. But you forgot that before I was your wife, I was an auditor. I notice when the numbers don't add up. I notice when the time doesn't account for itself." He remembered Evelyn as he had seen her that morning, sipping her matcha tea, smiling absently as he lied about a late meeting with the zoning board. She had leaned in and straightened his collar. "You look handsome today, Artie," she had said. "Knock them dead." She knew then. She knew then, and she had let him walk out the door. He looked back at the letter. "I haven't left because I was sad, Arthur. I left because I was finished. Do you remember the prenup? The one you insisted on? The one your father's lawyers drafted so carefully to protect the Pendleton family assets?" Arthur's breath hitched. Of course he remembered. He had been ruthless about it. Protective, he had called it. Clause 14, Section B, the letter read. Infidelity clause. If proven with substantial evidence, the premarital asset separation is voided, and the offending party forfeits their share of the marital home and primary custody of joint liquid assets. Arthur laughed. It was a dry, choking sound. "Substantial evidence?" he muttered to the empty room. "Good luck." He read the next paragraph. "I hired a PI 6 months ago, Arthur. His name is Mr. Vance. He has photos. He has credit card receipts. He has the lease agreement you signed for that apartment under your company's name, which, by the way, is technically embezzlement, since you used the firm's operational funds for a personal, illicit affair. The board won't like that." The blood drained from Arthur's face so fast he felt dizzy. He gripped the edge of the vanity table. The firm, Pendleton and Associates. He had charged the apartment rent to consulting fees. He thought no one checked those ledgers but him and his CFO, Marcus. "Marcus knows, by the way," the letter continued, as if reading his mind. "He was quite disappointed. But he was very helpful once I showed him the evidence of how you've been exposing the firm to liability." Arthur stood up, knocking the stool over. "No," he hissed. Marcus wouldn't. Marcus was his best friend. They had built the firm together. He scrambled for his phone in his pocket. He dialed Marcus. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Straight to voicemail. He looked back at the letter. There was one final paragraph. I've gone to stay at a place you won't find. Don't bother looking. The locks on the house will be changed by 8 a.m. tomorrow by the security company. I've already authorized it as the primary deed holder. Check the trust documents. You might have missed the amendment we signed last year for tax purposes. My lawyer, Julian Thorne, will be in touch. Julian Thorne. The name hit Arthur harder than the financial threats. Julian was the shark of Seattle divorce law. He was known for leaving husbands living in studio apartments, eating instant noodles. But worse than that, Julian was Evelyn's college ex-boyfriend, the one Arthur had always been jealous of. P.S., the note finished. I left the earrings. I don't wear jewelry bought with guilt. It makes my skin break out. Arthur stared at the diamonds. They twinkled innocently. He swiped the box off the table. It hit the wall with a dull thud, scattering the earrings onto the plush carpet. He ran to the closet. He yanked the doors open. Empty. Not just empty of clothes. The hangers were gone. The shoe racks were bare. It wasn't a frantic packing job. It was a surgical extraction. She hadn't just taken her clothes. She had taken the life out of the room. The perfume bottles were gone from the dresser. The photos of them in Cabo were gone from the walls, leaving behind pale, rectangular ghosts on the paint. He ran downstairs to the study. He needed to check the safe. He spun the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy door swung open. The cash reserve, $50,000 he kept for emergencies, was gone. The passports were gone. The deed to the lake house, gone. In their place was a single Polaroid photo. Arthur picked it up. It was a grainy, high-zoom photo taken through a window. It showed Arthur in the Capitol Hill apartment, shirtless, holding a glass of wine, laughing with Chloe. Arthur dropped the photo. He felt the bile rise in his throat. He rushed to the guest bathroom and dry heaved over the toilet. He wasn't just caught. He was checkmated. The sun began to rise over Lake Washington, casting a cruel, beautiful grey light into the living room. Arthur hadn't slept. He was sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by silence. He had spent the last 3 hours frantically checking his online accounts. Bank of America, joint checking, $0.2. Savings, $1,211. She had left him exactly the amount of the mortgage payment due tomorrow, a final ironic gesture. Investment portfolio, frozen. Action pending legal review. He tried to log into his work email. Access denied. Contact administrator. He felt like a man who had woken up to find his limbs had been amputated while he slept. At 7 a.m., his phone buzzed. It wasn't Evelyn. It was Chloe. Hey babe, fun night. You left your watch here, though. The Rolex. Want to swing by for lunch? Arthur stared at the text. Chloe. The catalyst. Suddenly, the thought of her, her laugh, her vanilla perfume, her chaotic apartment, made him physically ill. She was the anchor that had dragged him to the bottom of the ocean, and she didn't even know they were drowning yet. Shut up, he whispered to the phone. He needed to think. He was Arthur Pendleton. He was a fixer. He built skyscrapers. He didn't get taken down by a housewife and a lawyer. He stood up, his joints popping. He needed to find her. If he could talk to her, he could spin this. Evelyn loved him. She was hurt, that was all. This was a tantrum. A very expensive, legally complex tantrum. If he could just get in front of her, use his charm, remind her of the 10 years they had, he could fix it. But where was she? A place you won't find, she had written. Arthur went to the garage. He looked at the spot where her vintage Jaguar E-Type usually sat. It was empty. But wait, the Jaguar had a tracker. He had installed it 3 years ago when the car was stolen and recovered. He had never told Evelyn about it, because he didn't want her to worry about theft. He pulled up the tracking app on his phone. His fingers fumbled with the password. Locating vehicle. The spinning wheel mocked him. Vehicle found. Arthur's heart leapt. The map zoomed in. It wasn't in Seattle, it wasn't in Oregon. The red dot was pulsing steadily in Vancouver, British Columbia. At the Fairmont Pacific Rim Hotel, Canada. She had crossed the border. Arthur grabbed his keys. He didn't care about the firm right now. He didn't care about Marcus or the locked email. He had to get to Vancouver. He ran to his Mercedes. He jammed the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. He backed out of the garage, tires squealing. He was going to win her back, or at the very least, he was going to stop her from destroying him. As he reached the end of the driveway, a black SUV blocked the exit. Arthur slammed on the brakes. "Move!" he screamed, hitting the horn. The driver's door of the SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Arthur's car. He had silver hair and a face carved from granite. It was Julian Thorne, and he wasn't alone. From the passenger side stepped a woman. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. It wasn't Evelyn. It was Chloe. Arthur's brain short-circuited. "What?" he breathed. Chloe walked around the front of the SUV. She wasn't smiling. She looked professional, cold. Julian walked up to Arthur's driver window and tapped on the glass. Arthur rolled it down, his mind racing. "Get out of my way, Julian, and why is she with you?" Julian smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator looking at a wounded gazelle. "Hello, Arthur," Julian said, his voice smooth as velvet. "You've met my niece Chloe, haven't you?" Arthur looked from Julian to Chloe. "Niece?" Chloe took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were hard. "It was a job, Arthur," she said, her voice devoid of the bubbly cadence she used in the bedroom. "Aunt Evelyn pays very well." Arthur felt the world tilt on its axis. The affair. The chance meeting at the coffee shop 6 months ago. The way Chloe had pursued him. You set me up," Arthur whispered. "We gave you a rope," Julian corrected. "You're the one who tied the noose and jumped." Julian leaned in closer, resting his hands on the door frame of the Mercedes. "Now turn off the car, Arthur. We have a lot of paperwork to go over, and you don't own this car anymore. It's leased under the company, remember. And as of 6 a.m. this morning, the board of directors voted to terminate your contract for gross misconduct and misappropriation of funds." Julian held up a set of keys. "I'm here to collect the company vehicle." Arthur sat there, the engine idling, the heater blasting, as the freezing cold reality finally set in. He wasn't just checkmated. He had been playing a game he didn't even know existed. To understand the magnitude of Arthur's fall, you have to understand the silence of Evelyn Pendleton. For 6 months, Arthur believed his wife was simply a fixture in his life, a beautifully dressed mannequin who managed the household staff and attended charity luncheons. He didn't know that the mannequin was watching him with the eyes of a forensic auditor. It had started on a Tuesday in November. A simple credit card statement. Arthur was usually careful, but arrogance breeds sloppiness. He had used the joint Amex for a dinner at Canlis, a $600 meal. Evelyn had looked at the statement. She remembered that night. Arthur had told her he was ordering takeout at the office while finishing the blueprints for the tech campus in Bellevue. Most wives would have screamed. Most wives would have waited for him to come home and thrown the statement in his face. Evelyn did neither. She went to her private study, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote the date and the discrepancy. She didn't cry. She felt a cold, sharp clarity, like ice water in her veins. 2 days later, she called Julian Thorne. They met at a small, nondescript diner in Snohomish, 40 minutes away from their social circle. Julian hadn't changed much since college. Still sharp, still cynical, but with expensive suits and a reputation that terrified grown men. "I need a divorce, Julian," she said, cutting her steak with precision. "But not a normal divorce. I want a demolition." Julian listened as she laid out the facts: the late nights, the smell of vanilla perfume, the emotional distance. "If we file now," Julian warned, "he has the upper hand. The assets are commingled. The firm is protected by the trust. He'll give you a settlement, sure, but he'll keep the life he built. Is that what you want?" "No," Evelyn said softly. "I built that life, Julian. He just put his name on the door. I want him to feel what it's like to be a guest in his own existence." That was when Julian proposed the honey trap. "I have a niece," Julian said. "Chloe. She's an actress struggling in LA. She's smart, she's broke, and she hates narcissists. We can plant her. Not to seduce him. We won't entrap him legally, but to be available. If Arthur is looking, she'll be there. If he bites, we document everything. Every text, every receipt, every lie." Evelyn hesitated for only a second. "Do it." For the next 6 months, Evelyn Pendleton gave the performance of a lifetime. When Arthur came home smelling of Chloe, Evelyn kissed his cheek and asked about his day. When he bought her the diamond earrings to assuage his guilt, she wore them to the opera and held his hand, all while calculating the resale value in her head. She watched him transform. He became cocky. He started moving money, sloppily, from the firm's accounts to cover the rent for Chloe's apartment. Evelyn saw it all. She had access to his passwords. He used the same variation of his birthday for everything. She downloaded the ledgers. She forwarded the emails to Julian. She sat with Marcus, Arthur's business partner, over coffee. "I'm worried about him, Marcus," she had said, feigning concern. "He seems erratic, spending company money on personal luxuries." Marcus, a man who loved the bottom line more than friendship, looked at the spreadsheets Evelyn slid across the table. His face went pale. "He's billing the mistress's rent as consulting fees?" "I'm afraid so," Evelyn sighed. "I don't want to ruin him, Marcus. But you have a fiduciary duty to the board. If the IRS finds this—" She let the sentence hang. She watched Marcus turn against Arthur in real time. It was masterful. She wasn't just divorcing a husband, she was isolating a target. The night she left, she didn't feel sadness. She walked through the house, touching the furniture she had picked out, the art she had curated. She felt like a ghost, haunting her own life. She placed the letter on the vanity. She placed the diamonds in the box. She walked out into the rain, got into the rental car Julian had arranged, having moved the Jaguar days ago, and didn't look back. The woman who drove away wasn't Arthur's wife anymore. She was his executioner. Back in the driveway, the rain had stopped, but the damp cold had settled into Arthur's bones. He stood next to his silver Mercedes, which was no longer his. Julian Thorne held the keys, dangling them like a pendulum. "UberX is usually quick in this neighborhood," Julian said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I'd offer you a ride, but Chloe has a casting call." Chloe, the woman Arthur had whispered secrets to, the woman he had told about his insecurities, didn't even look at him. She was checking her makeup in the side mirror of Julian's SUV. "Bye, Artie," she said flatly. "Thanks for the Rolex. It paid off my credit card." They drove away. Arthur watched the tail lights of the SUV disappear, leaving him standing in his bespoke suit, shivering, with a dead phone and a wallet full of declined credit cards. He had to walk. He walked 2 miles to the nearest gas station. The humiliation burned hotter than the physical exertion. Cars passed him, neighbors perhaps, splashing dirty water onto his trousers. He finally managed to convince the gas station attendant to let him use the landline to call a taxi. He had $40 in cash in his pocket. He directed the taxi to the offices of Pendleton and Associates in downtown Seattle. He needed to talk to Marcus. He needed to explain that this was a misunderstanding, a personal vendetta that had bled into business. He could fix this. He was the creative genius. Marcus was just the money guy. Marcus needed him. The taxi dropped him off in front of the glass skyscraper. Arthur marched toward the revolving doors, his jaw set. He swiped his security badge at the turnstile. Beep, beep. Access denied. He swiped again. Red light. Mr. Pendleton? Arthur turned. It was Mike, the head of building security. Mike had worked there for 10 years. Arthur gave him a Christmas bonus every year. Mike, damn thing is broken, Arthur said, trying to force a laugh. Buzz me in. Mike looked down at his shoes, then back at Arthur. He looked pained. I can't do that, sir. I have a memo. You've been barred from the premises. Barred? Arthur's voice rose an octave. I own this damn building, Mike. I designed the lobby we're standing in. Sir, please, Mike said, stepping forward, his hand hovering near his belt. Don't make this a scene. Marcus left a box for you. Mike signaled to the front desk. The receptionist, a new girl Arthur barely knew, handed over a cardboard banker's box. Arthur stared at it. It was light. He took the box and walked outside, sitting on the concrete planter at the edge of the plaza. He opened the lid. Inside was a framed photo of him and Evelyn, glass cracked, his architecture license certificate, a stapler, and a letter. He ripped the letter open. It was from the board of directors. Dear Mr. Pendleton, pursuant to Article 5 of the Partnership Agreement, Moral Turpitude and Embezzlement, your shares have been placed in a blind trust pending a forensic audit. Your access to company accounts, premises, and intellectual property is suspended immediately. We have notified the State Licensing Board of the pending investigation regarding misuse of client funds. Arthur dropped the letter. It wasn't just the affair. They were going after his license. They were going to make sure he never built so much as a garden shed in this state again. Marcus, Arthur growled. He pulled out his phone, which had 4% battery left. He dialed Marcus's private line. This time, Marcus answered. You have some nerve calling, Marcus said. His voice was cold, devoid of the camaraderie they had shared over scotch for 15 years. You stabbed me in the back, Arthur shouted, ignoring the pedestrian staring at him. You listened to her. She's crazy, Marcus. She's vindictive. She showed me the ledgers, Arthur, Marcus snapped. You spent $40,000 of the firm's money on a rental in Capitol Hill. You charged client dinners that were just you and that girl. You put the firm at risk. I didn't stab you in the back. You committed suicide and splashed the blood on my suit. I can explain. Save it for the deposition, Marcus said. Oh, and Arthur? Evelyn came by yesterday to collect her personal effects from your office. She took the awards, too. Said she was the one who pushed you to enter the competitions, so they belong to her. Goodbye. The line went dead. Arthur sat on the concrete, the bustle of the city moving around him. He was a man who defined himself by what he built. Now, he was sitting in the rubble of his own life. But then, a spark of anger ignited in his chest, a dark, twisted defiance. They thought they had him. They thought he was just going to roll over. He looked at the tracker app on his phone again. The battery was at 2%. Vancouver, BC, Fairmont Pacific Rim. She was there. She was gloating. Arthur stood up. He didn't have a car. He didn't have access to his bank accounts, but he had the $5,000 emergency cash stash hidden in a hollowed-out book in his mother's old house, a house he hadn't sold yet, sitting empty in Tacoma. He would get the cash. He would rent a car. He would drive to Vancouver. He wasn't going to let her win without looking her in the eye. The drive to Vancouver took 4 hours. Arthur drove a rented Ford Focus that smelled of stale cigarettes. It was a humiliating downgrade from the S-Class, but his rage fueled him. He crossed the border with a glare at the customs agent, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He arrived at the Fairmont Pacific Rim at 8 p.m. The hotel was luxury incarnate, modern, sleek, expensive. It was exactly the kind of place Evelyn would choose. He walked to the front desk. He looked disheveled, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, stubble darkening his jaw. "I'm here to see my wife," he told the concierge. "Evelyn Pendleton." The concierge typed into the computer. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't give out guest information." Arthur slammed his hand on the marble counter. "I know she's here. Her car is in your valet lot. I just saw it." The concierge didn't flinch. "Security," he said into his earpiece. "Wait," Arthur said, lowering his voice. He pulled out a wad of cash, $500. He slid it across the counter. "Just tell me the room number. Please. It's an emergency. She has my medication." The concierge looked at the money, then at Arthur. He sighed. "Room 2104. But if you cause a disturbance, the police will be called." Arthur didn't wait. He sprinted to the elevators. 21st floor. The hallway was quiet. Arthur counted the numbers. 2100, 2102, 2104. He stood before the door. He could hear the faint sound of the TV inside. She was in there. He didn't knock. He pulled out the spare keycard he had swiped from the housekeeping cart in the hallway while the maid was distracted, an old trick from his college days. He swiped the card. The light turned green. Arthur burst into the room. "Evelyn, you think you can just—" He stopped. The room was a suite, overlooking the harbor. It was beautiful, and it was empty. The bed was made. The luggage rack was empty. But on the desk, facing the door, was a laptop. It was open. The screen was glowing, and next to the laptop was the key fob to the Jaguar. Arthur walked slowly toward the desk. On the screen was a Zoom meeting window. It was active. "Hello, Arthur," a voice said from the speakers. Arthur froze. He looked at the screen. Evelyn was there. She was wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of white wine. She looked calm, radiant even. But the background wasn't the hotel room. Behind her, through a window, Arthur could see palm trees. He could hear the ocean. "Where are you?" Arthur whispered. "I'm in the place you promised to take me for our 5th anniversary," Evelyn said, taking a sip of wine. "But you were too busy with that project in Portland. Remember, the Maldives. It's beautiful this time of year." "The Maldives?" Arthur stared at the room around him. "But the car, the tracker. I hired a driver to take the Jaguar to Vancouver," Evelyn explained, as if explaining a simple math problem to a child. "I knew you tracked the car, Arthur. I knew you'd come running after the one thing you thought you still owned." "Why?" Arthur slumped into the desk chair. "Why do this? Why the games?" "Because I wanted you to be exactly where you are right now," Evelyn said. Her voice hardened. "I wanted you to drive 4 hours in a cheap rental car, cross a border, and break into a hotel room just to realize that you are completely irrelevant." "Irrelevant?" Arthur laughed bitterly. "I'm your husband. I made you." "You didn't make me, Arthur. You consumed me. You took my time, my youth, and my support, and you fed it to your ego. And when you got bored, You tried to replace me with a child." She leaned closer to the camera. "I emptied the joint accounts, Arthur. But I didn't steal it. I used the power of attorney you signed 3 years ago when you went in for your back surgery. You never revoked it. I liquidated our assets and transferred them to an offshore trust in the Caymans. It's untouchable. You'll get it back, maybe in a few years, after the lawyers take their cut. But for now, you have nothing." "You can't leave me with nothing," Arthur pleaded, the fight draining out of him. "I have the mortgage. I have the debts." "Actually," Evelyn smiled, "I paid off the mortgage on the house. It's debt-free." Arthur blinked. Hope flared. "You did?" "Yes, and then I transferred the title to a holding company owned by Julian Thorne. It's his retainer fee for the divorce. You're trespassing, Arthur. You have 24 hours to vacate the property before Julian evicts you." Arthur stared at the screen, his mouth open. She had given his house, his masterpiece, to the man he hated most in the world. "Goodbye, Arthur," Evelyn said. "Enjoy the view of Vancouver. I hear it's rainy." The screen went black. Arthur sat in the empty hotel room. He looked at the Jaguar key on the desk. He was in a foreign country, with no job, no house, no wife, and the realization that for the last 6 months he hadn't been the player. He had been the pawn. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark water of the harbour. He saw his reflection in the glass. He looked small, but the story wasn't over. Arthur Pendleton was a narcissist, and narcissists don't die quietly. They burn everything down on their way out. He picked up the Jaguar key. He wasn't going to drive home. He was going to find Julian Thorne. The drive south from Vancouver was not a journey. It was a hemorrhage. Arthur Pendleton tore down the I-5 corridor at 110 miles per hour, the stolen Jaguar E-Type screaming beneath him. The car, a vintage masterpiece of British engineering that Evelyn had restored with her own money, vibrated violently at that speed, the steering wheel shuddering in his grip like a living thing, trying to buck him off. Arthur didn't care. He wasn't driving with skill, he was driving with entitlement. The rain had returned, transforming the highway into a ribbon of obsidian slickness. Every wiper blade stroke against the glass sounded like a judge's gavel. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of old leather and Arthur's own sour panic. He was talking to himself, a manic, disjointed monologue that filled the silence. "She can't just take it," he muttered, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the darkness ahead. "It's a trust. It's a revocable trust. I can revoke it. I can revoke her." He replayed the Zoom call in his mind, over and over. The palm trees, the white wine, the calmness of her voice. Irrelevant. That was the word that had splintered his psyche. He could handle being hated. He could handle being screamed at. He was a powerful man. Powerful men had enemies. But he could not handle being irrelevant. He could not handle being a footnote in his own biography. By the time he crossed the Ship Canal Bridge and saw the lights of Seattle glowing against the low clouds, his plan, if one could call it that, had calcified into a singular, destructive impulse. He wasn't going to a hotel. He wasn't going to beg. He was going to the house in Medina. He knew the locks were changed. He knew Julian Thorne, that vulture in a 3-piece suit, claimed to own the deed. But Arthur Pendleton was the architect. He had drawn the lines of that house on a napkin 10 years ago. He had poured the foundation. He knew the house's breath and its bones. A piece of paper didn't make it Julian's. It was his. He took the exit for Medina, the tires squealing as he cornered too hard. He sped past the towering hedges and the gates of the tech billionaires, finally turning onto his own winding driveway. The house loomed out of the mist, dark and silent. It was a modern fortress of glass, steel, and cedar, perched on the edge of the lake. Usually, the landscape lighting would be on, highlighting the Japanese maples Arthur had imported. Tonight, it was pitch black. It looked like a tomb. Arthur slammed the Jaguar into park, right on the front lawn, the tires tearing long, muddy gashes into the pristine zoysia grass Evelyn prized so much. He killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was deafening. He stepped out into the rain. The cold wind slapped his face, but he didn't feel it. He stared at the front door, massive, pivoting mahogany. He patted his pockets. No keys. Just the Jaguar fob and a crumpled pack of gum. "Open up!" he screamed at the dark facade. His voice cracked, raw and pathetic against the wind. "Julian, I know you're in there." No answer. The house stared back at him, indifferent. Arthur walked around to the side, slipping on the wet grass. He went to the sunroom. He pressed his face against the glass. It was pitch black inside. He tried to slide the door, locked. He remembered the loose latch. He had noticed it 3 years ago. A slight defect in the manufacturing of the German sliding mechanism. He had meant to fix it. But there was always a meeting, always a gala, always a Chloe. He gripped the handle, lifted the heavy pane upward with all his strength, and shoved. It didn't budge. Evelyn had fixed it. Of course she had. She had fixed the latch just like she had fixed the finances, quietly, efficiently, without telling him. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded his vision. He looked down and saw a decorative river rock, a smooth, heavy grey stone used in the landscaping border. He picked it up. It was heavy, cold, and primitive. He walked back to the front of the house. He didn't hesitate. He swung the rock with a guttural roar, smashing it into the narrow, tempered glass panel beside the front door. Crash. The sound was explosive, shattering the suburban stillness. Shards of glass rained down onto the slate entryway, glittering like the diamonds he had bought to silence his guilt. Arthur reached through the jagged hole, his sleeve snagging on a shard, tearing the fabric of his suit and slicing into his forearm. He didn't feel the pain. He fumbled for the thumb turn on the inside deadbolt. He twisted it. Click. He pushed the door open and stumbled into the foyer. "Julian!" he bellowed. "Get your ass out here." He slapped the wall panel, hitting the all-on scene for the Lutron lighting system. The house flooded with light. Arthur blinked, shielding his eyes. As his vision adjusted, the breath left his lungs. The house was gutted. The foyer, usually dominated by a massive abstract sculpture and a Persian runner, was bare. The walls, once adorned with curated local art, were naked, displaying only the faint, darker squares where the frames had hung for a decade. The living room beyond was a graveyard of white sheets. The few pieces of furniture remaining, the sofa, the grand piano, were draped in dust covers, looking like shapeless ghosts. It smelled wrong. The scent of lilies and beeswax that had defined his home for 10 years was gone, replaced by the smell of ammonia, cardboard, and something sharper. Scotch. "You're trespassing, Arthur." The voice came from above, calm, resonant. Arthur spun around, his wet shoes squeaking on the hardwood. Standing on the mezzanine landing, leaning casually against the glass railing, was Julian Thorne. He looked infuriatingly at home. He was wearing a navy silk dressing gown over a white dress shirt and trousers, holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He looked down at Arthur, not with fear, but with the mild annoyance one might show a muddy dog that had run into the house. And he wasn't alone. From the shadows of the hallway behind Julian, a woman stepped forward. She was wrapped in a thick, cream-coloured cashmere throw blanket. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was holding a mug of tea. It was Chloe. But it wasn't the Chloe Arthur knew. The Chloe he knew was bubbly, wide-eyed, and looked at him like he was a god. This woman looked tired. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and entirely devoid of affection. "You," Arthur breathed, the words scraping his throat. "You're in my house, wearing my wife's clothes." "Technically," Chloe said, her voice dry and devoid of the baby doll lilt she had used for 6 months. "This is Julian's guest blanket, and the house belongs to the Pendleton Asset Liquidation Trust. So, you're in the Trust's house." Arthur charged the stairs. He made it up 3 steps before he stopped, his legs suddenly feeling like lead. He gripped the banister, his knuckles white. "I'm going to kill you," Arthur whispered, shaking. "I'm going to kill both of you." "I wouldn't recommend that," Julian said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "The silent alarm triggered the moment you broke the glass, Arthur. Medina police response time averages 4 minutes. You have about 90 seconds left." "Let them come!" Arthur shouted, pointing a finger stained with his own blood at Julian. "I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them about the setup, the entrapment. You hired a whore to seduce me so you could steal my company." Chloe didn't flinch at the slur. She just took a sip of her tea, watching him over the rim of the mug. "It wasn't entrapment, Arthur. Entrapment requires coercion. Did I force you to buy me that apartment? Did I force you to skip your wife's birthday? Did I force you to tell me you loved me more than you ever loved her?" "You lied," Arthur screamed. "Everything was a lie." "The affection was a lie, yes," Chloe admitted calmly. "But the data? The data was very real. You have sloppy OPSEC, Artie. You left your laptop open. You used the same passcode for your phone as your garage door. You made it so easy. It was actually boring." Arthur felt the room spinning. Boring. He was the dynamic genius. He was the architect of the skyline. He couldn't be boring. "You think this holds up in court?" Arthur looked at Julian, desperate for a legal foothold. "Adultery doesn't void a prenup in this state. Not like this. I'll sue you for conspiracy." Julian set his glass down on the railing. He looked at Arthur with genuine pity. "You still don't get it, do you?" Julian said softly. "You think this is about the affair. You think Evelyn destroyed your life because you cheated. She's a jealous, vindictive—" "Arthur, stop!" Julian commanded. The authority in his voice snapped Arthur's mouth shut. "Evelyn didn't leave you because you were sleeping with Chloe. She could have lived with that. She left you because you were dangerous." Arthur frowned. "Dangerous? I'm an architect, not a gangster." 3 months ago, Julian said. "You were in bed with Chloe. You had consumed a bottle of Camus. You were feeling expansive, boastful." Chloe reached into the pocket of her borrowed robe and pulled out a small, black digital voice recorder. She held it up. "Do you remember what you told me about the Bellevue high-rise project?" Chloe asked. Arthur's blood ran cold. The Bellevue project, the zoning variance, the height restriction that had threatened to kill the deal. I don't know what you're talking about." "Press play, Chloe," Julian said. Chloe pressed the button. The audio was crisp. Arthur's voice filled the cavernous, empty foyer. It was unmistakable. The slur of alcohol, the arrogance, the deep timbre of a man trying to impress a younger woman. "Marcus is a coward, babe. He worries about the rules. I told him, rules are for people who can't afford to break them. I met the zoning commissioner in the parking lot of the terrifyingly cheap diner off I-405, handed him a gym bag with 50 grand in mixed bills. Bam. Variance approved the next morning. That's how you build a legacy, Chloe. You don't ask for permission, you buy it. Click. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur slumped against the banister. He slid down until he was sitting on the stairs, his head in his hands. The jagged cut on his arm smeared blood on the pristine white riser. "You recorded me," he whispered. "We had to," Julian said, walking down the stairs slowly, stopping a few steps above Arthur. Evelyn found the withdrawal in the company ledger. $50,000 marked as material costs. She knew you didn't buy materials with cash. She suspected bribery. Julian leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you know what the feds do when they catch a partner in a firm engaging in bribery and wire fraud, Arthur? They use the RICO Act. They seize everything. Not just your assets, her assets, the house, her inheritance, her pension, everything tainted by your dirty money." Arthur looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. "So she didn't initiate the divorce to punish you," Julian said. "She initiated it to separate her assets from yours before the indictment came down. She needed proof that she was not complicit. She needed proof that she was investigating you, not helping you. That recording? That's her immunity deal. It proves she was the whistleblower." Arthur stared at the floor. The magnitude of the betrayal and the brilliance of it crushed him. She hadn't just outsmarted him in a divorce. She had turned him into a criminal defendant to save her own financial future. "Where is it?" Arthur croaked. "The recording?" "The original is with the district attorney," Chloe said. "Sent via secure courier yesterday morning. The copy is in the cloud. And another copy is with Marcus." "Marcus?" Arthur looked up sharply. "Marcus took the deal, Arthur," Julian said gently. "He's testifying against you. In exchange for full immunity and retention of the firm's legitimate assets, he's giving them everything. The duplicate books, the emails, the dates of the payoffs. You're alone." Arthur looked around the empty house. He looked at the shadows where his art used to hang. He looked at the woman he had risked everything for, who was looking at him like a specimen in a jar. He looked at the man he had hated for 20 years, who was now the master of his domain. He was a man who built skyscrapers, structures designed to withstand earthquakes and windstorms. But he had built his own life on a foundation of sand, and the tide had finally come in. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a wash of oscillating blue and red light. The sirens were loud now, cutting through the heavy front door. Tires crunched on the gravel outside. Car doors slammed. "Police! We have the perimeter secured!" a voice shouted from outside. Arthur didn't move. He didn't run. There was nowhere to run. The Cayman's account Evelyn mentioned, he couldn't access it. His passport, gone. His reputation, dead. He looked up at Julian one last time. "Does she?" Arthur's voice broke. He cleared his throat, trying to summon one last shred of dignity. "Does she hate me?" Julian considered the question. He looked at the broken glass on the floor, the mud on the carpet, the ruin of a man on the stairs. "I think," Julian said, "that she doesn't feel anything at all. You stopped being her husband a long time ago, Arthur. You became a liability. And Evelyn is an auditor. She writes off liabilities." "Police!" The front door was kicked fully open. 3 officers swarmed into the foyer, guns drawn, flashlights blinding. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" Arthur Pendleton slowly stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his ruined wet suit. He looked at the officers, then back at the empty space on the wall where his portrait used to hang. He raised his hands in the air. As the officers rushed him, forcing him against the wall to cuff him, Arthur saw Chloe turn away and walk back into the shadows of the hallway. Julian took a sip of his scotch, watching the arrest with the dispassionate interest of a man watching the evening news. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around Arthur's wrists. It was the only jewelry he would be wearing for a very long time. Arthur Pendleton was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for bribery and wire fraud. The scandal destroyed Pendleton and Associates. Marcus, his partner, testified against him in exchange for immunity. Evelyn never returned to Seattle. She sold the Maldives vacation photos to a tabloid for a modest sum, donating the money to a charity for women recovering from financial abuse. She eventually settled in Tuscany, where she bought a small vineyard. She never remarried. She learned that she didn't need a partner to be complete. She just needed peace. As for the house in Medina, it was sold to a tech billionaire who tore it down. He said the feng shui was off. He said it felt like the house had bad energy. Arthur sits in a cell today, telling stories to the other inmates about the skyscrapers he used to build and the empire he used to rule. Most of them ignore him. They know the truth. He isn't an architect anymore. He's just a man who had a diamond in his hand and traded it for a piece of glass, only to cut his own throat with the shards. The tragedy of Arthur isn't that he fell. It's that he fell from a height he never really deserved to stand on in the first place. And that is the story of Arthur and Evelyn. It's a brutal reminder that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes it's just artificial turf covering a trap door. Evelyn played the long game, not out of malice, but out of survival. She turned her pain into a strategy and walked away, not just with her freedom, but with her dignity intact. What do you think? Was Evelyn's revenge too cold, or did Arthur get exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. Team Evelyn or Team Too Far? If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, twists, and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy one coming up next week about a lottery winner who faked his own death. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.